All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in our faculty speaker series on essentially what is PowerPoint 101. So I wanted to begin with just a simple question. How many of you have witnessed a PowerPoint or, God forbid, actually given one that looks something like this? Got the blue background, you got the white or the yellow text, and like kind of standard boilerplate font. That's fine. I mean, that's a good starting off point, and certainly this already is a vast improvement over, just sitting up there and having a death grip on your podium as you just talk words at these people with absolutely no corresponding visuals. But this is Pepperdine University. We all hold ourselves to a higher standard, and so I'm very glad that all of you chose to join us today so that we can take, just kind of the bare minimum right here and just shake it out until we finally get like a good, strong PowerPoint. We want to make PowerPoints here, not weak points. So what I've outlined for you today is just a basic design boot camp for your presentations. And like all good boot camps, you have two main aspects. If you want to get in shape, you got to start eating right. So we have a quick diet outline for your PowerPoints, what to eat, what to indulge in, what to avoid. And then we also have a hard work routine. Like what do we actually got to power through and get in there, roll our sleeves up, and do some work with. So the first slide here, we got some diet guidelines for what we should kind of be incorporating into our PowerPoints. This is, again, like most diets, it's a general rule of thumb. It's not hard and fast. You can cheat here, you can cheat there. The first one, though, is that we need a feast for the eyes. So we want to use visuals. That's probably one of the biggest ones we'll talk about today, as I'm sure. So we have a couple of veterans in our midst today that have joined previous faculty development sessions that have listened to a similar presentation than this, but this one's been changed up a bit. So feast for the eyes is the first aspect. Portion control, just like with all good diets, is second. So less is more is a good approach to both how much food you put in your body and how much content you put on your slides. And then lastly, we need to cut the fat. So all these little black pies here represent the bullet points that we need to learn how to throw away, or at least modify enough so that they can be more beneficial than harmful. So before we really get into how we can actually apply these things, we need to talk about some weaknesses and challenges that everybody faces as a professor. Or really as a presenter of any kind. This just applies especially to professors today. One of your main challenges is that students don't read, or at least some professors feel like they don't read. Either way, if they do or they don't, if they do read and they don't retain it, that's the same as if they didn't. So the problem is specifically they don't read the textbooks. Your slides are a different matter. We'll get to that later on. But because of this challenge or perceived challenge that a lot of professors feel, they want to make sure they get their content across. So this can sometimes be the temptation to incorporate a lot of content, just really text-dense, heavy slides, when that may not be necessary, or in fact can be harmful in terms of retention. So that's one of our challenges. Another challenge, this kind of goes 180 degrees opposite, when you have people asking, Professor, can I get a copy of your slides? Let's say after you go through this regime and you do the boot camp and you follow the diet guidelines, your PowerPoints are just so good that your students come to you asking, can I just get a copy of these? And there's a lot of pros and cons to that. It depends really on your individual teaching style. Some people like to make their PowerPoints available as kind of like a starter set of notes to students. But a challenge that can come with that is that if they are so good and they do incorporate all your content so well, sometimes students can become overly reliant upon them, to the point where they don't pay attention in class anymore because they're like, it's all in the PowerPoint, I'll just download that later. Or if they're so good, they won't even come to class because they think, well, he's just going to read the slides off to me anyways. Like, I don't need to read. I've got the Cliff Notes version right here. Why should I put in any work? So we'll talk about how to avoid things like that as well. Again, if they think that you're just, why come to class if the professor's just going to read everything off the slide to me? No point. The final challenge is that they're often the same dusty old lectures that are rarely updated. So you're taking a good first step into just even coming here and being exposed to some new ideas. What I want you to do right now is just take a big collective deep breath in and hold it and think about all those terrible PowerPoints that you've been a part of or given, and just blow all the dust off. Just so we can get all that dust off there. Now, the workout plan. Now this is where we roll our sleeves up. First aspect of how we want to revamp some of these old PowerPoints. Visuals that I talked about earlier. We need to use visual cues. A lot of times, presentations will have tons of text and a tiny little clip art, something or another, often just kind of floating nebulously off to the right of the screen. A lot of times they don't even make sense. This is pulled directly from PowerPoint. I have no idea when you would need to use this as like a strengthening visual. Like when would somebody be like, I don't exactly understand what you said. But that ampersand with the shadow up there, now it all makes sense. I understand, I'm with you now. It's baffling. What I want you to do is reverse that. So I want you to take a small amount of text on your screen and have big, beautiful, full screen visuals that preferably make sense. Now, my name is Landon Phillips. I'm the multimedia designer for the technology and learning group here in IT. And so I have a big design background. So a lot of the things that you see here, you may think, okay, well, if this guy's a designer, that makes sense why he likes these fancy visuals so much. I'm a history professor, I'm a communication professor, I'm a law professor, whatever it is, I just need to stick to what I know best and have my content on there and let it speak for itself. That's fine, but I know as, academic-minded people, everyone can appreciate when things are backed up with research. So the research we have here cited is that if you hear a piece of information, 3 days later, you'll retain about 10% of it. It's not bad considering how much information that we process throughout the day, but that's not very good if you're trying to educate people and impart knowledge on them. If you show them a visual, that same retention 3 days later jumps up to 35%. So we've already roughly tripled it, assuming, again, the visual makes sense. Now, if you combine those two things, if you have strong visuals to go with your supported message, retention jumps up to 65%. Now that's getting into the respectable territory that we want to do as professors. Now the reason why pictures are better is that reading is very inefficient for our brains. It's something you kind of take for granted, but when you really think about all the background processes that go on when we read, like our minds first have to see these abstract shapes and symbols that we recognize as letters. They have to be combined in a certain series of sequential order to form words that then convey the idea of, say, a chicken or whatever other image you want to convey. If I just slap a picture of a chicken up there, you're instantly going to know what I'm talking about. It kind of shortcuts all of those background processes that hopefully after you're out of kindergarten, only take a few milliseconds. But having that shortcut there improves that retention. It makes it easier and more memorable. So, you're thinking, okay, that's all well and great. How do I do that? The average professor will say, I've been on Google and I type in something, Civil War musket, and I get 24 million results. And so somebody thinks, I don't have time to go through all those and find the right one. Or some people say, I've done that on Google, I found the one I want, but then I try to use it, it's all pixelated, it's very small, I try to make it big, it looks ugly, defeats the purpose. Or the very astute professor will say, I want to set a good example for my students and be citing my images properly. I want to make sure I use copyright-free images. How do I even know on Google what is good to use and what is not good to use, like what's off limits, what I need to cite, how do I do that? We have, thankfully, there's a repository that's not just locked away for the upper echelons of, secret society designers and advertisers. It's available for everyone for free. It's called Stock Exchange. So the website is SXC, stockexchange.hu. We can actually go through that now, and I saw a lot of you brought your computers with you. If not, you can feel free to use the Dells in front of us. But if you haven't already, I wanted to walk you through setting up an account now, just so it's done. So after you get out through here, it's one less step for you to do. You can already get the ground rolling and revamping those PowerPoints with fury as soon as you leave here. But go ahead and log into sxc.hu. And there should be a button kind of in the top right here that says sign in or create an account. So I just wanted to take you through a real quick kind of sample search for stock exchange, because just the way the website is structured, I want you to feel comfortable using it, not so that, when you first try it out, you're kind of looking around and searching on the screen and, oh, do I click on this or do I click on that, or just want to make it very easy. So we're getting pretty close on signups being completed. We're good?
Save it as a favorite, right?
Yeah. Bookmark the site.
Yeah.
Write it down on the sticky pad near your monitor, whatever you got to do. I have to admit, SXT is not the most memorable, especially since it ends in HU. It is originally a Hungarian domain, but a lot of my students, whenever I co-teach a graphic design course here, a lot of them have the hardest type. They're SCX, SHUX, like how, what? No, it's stock exchange. Stock exchange, FHU. So stock exchange.hu. We'll go through that sample search now. So first of all, search box is pretty straightforward. That's just in the top center of the screen. First of all, actually, you'll need to log in. So after you've done your confirmation email, you should see your little screen in at the top, and you'll be able to search. The other reason why I wanted to set up an account with you is because without an account, you can't start using the site yet.
Should we do that now too?
Yeah, if you've activated your account or logged in, go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Just so we can kind of be following along. That's the great thing about giving this presentation in this lab, in that you got some space to actually kind of be doing some hands-on work as well. So if you get that message, then you may need to check your email real quick, either just through your Outlook or through webmail, Pepperdine, or mail at Pepperdine.edu.
And mine went to junk mail, so you may have to check your junk.
Yeah, that can happen as well. So when you start with the basic search, again, for the sample search here, I'm just looking for an image of a bear. Now, the way stock exchange makes money, because every site has to make money somehow, is like most of them, it runs ads. Now, these ads can be a little bit trickier than most, in that it's not just like a obvious, blinking banner that says you've won, you're the millionth, visitor to this site. Click here. Da-da-da-da-da. The way they make ad revenue is that they have partnered with paid stock exchange sites. So iStockPhoto.com, Getty Images, things like that. Actually, when you first run a search, in the background, Stock Exchange also runs that same search on their servers. So these first results, you'll notice in very tiny letters, it says premium results for whatever it was you searched for on iStockPhoto.com for as low as $1. So the way they make money is that the top row and the bottom row of all your searches will be premium results. Now, in order to not be confused, there's a simple way to know what's free and what's paid for. You'll notice if you mouse over some of these searches, you get a nice big thumbnail that pops up. So instead of having to, in Google, you kind of have to either click on each image if you want to make it look bigger. This one, all you got to do is hover your mouse over it, and a good preview will appear. For the top row ones, you'll notice that there'll be a large watermark on the image. It'll have like a big white X, and it'll say iStockPhoto across it. And you're like, how can I use this? It's been ruined. Somebody wrote all over it already. It's because, of course, when you pay for the image, they remove that watermark for you and allow you to use it. Now, if you notice the same thing, if you try mousing over the ones in the middle, that doesn't happen. So that's just the easy kind of rule of thumb to determine if something is free or something is paid for. If it doesn't have a watermark, you're free to use. So, the next two steps. You find, say, this bear you like, you click on it, you're almost there, you're close, but there's one last step before you get the full-size image you want. This screen here is kind of just details about that image. So you can see like the actual dimensions, you can see who photographed it. You can also see categories and search terms, which actually can be very helpful and say, you're looking for something very specific you have in mind, and you found something that is close but not quite right. you can use these keywords as kind of inspiration for other searches you can run. So let's say I'm looking for an image of the Declaration. I type that in, but it doesn't quite come up. But if I search, 1776 or Founding Fathers or, Constitution or something else that's kind of related that may also be tagged, this can be a good jumping off point for kind of stretching your brain a little bit into thinking about different visuals you can look for. Because that's a problem we'll talk about later in the presentation. When you do get excited and want to use visuals, sometimes you can have something so set in your mind that the perfect visual for how you want to represent it, that you can waste a lot of time trying to find that exact one, instead of thinking a little bit outside the box and realizing, with a little lateral thinking, oh, this image is equally as effective, it's just I was fixated on this other one. So, after you get to this page, and what's important to note is that this is the page that I always cite in my reference sections of my PowerPoints. So if I save that URL and then paste it either at the bottom corner of one of my images, or if you make a reference pages at the end of the deck, that's the URL that I save. This is good just for, again, being a good example in citing your sources for your students. But also, if I want to go back and find that exact image, I don't have to always keep it on my computer. If I have the URL, I'll know exactly how to find it again. So, this is close but no cigar. If you click the bear, though, Stock Exchange makes it very clear that you found the full-size image. You get a giant full-size image. A lot of times people will kind of get stuck on that last step, and they'll try to right-click and save image, and it still comes out really small, and they say, what gives? You told me this was like high-quality stuff. This is really tiny. It's because you didn't do the final click-through. Once you do the final click-through, you'll definitely, unequivocally know you have found the full-sized image. So, now that we've done a sample one, I want you guys to run a quick search. If you can find this exact image, perfect. If not, just find one that's similar. Bonus points for finding this one, though, because I want you to look at an image. This is kind of a practical example of, if I have something very specific in mind, what keywords should I use to find it? So, if it's hiker, if it's nature, if it's whatever, type in a couple different search words and see if you can find this image. If not, that's okay too. We found any jackpots yet?
Close.
Actually, this is kind of tricky, to be honest. Whenever I was using this image from a previous presentation as well, and I was kind of taking my own medicine and trying to research for this exact one, and I was like, all right, I'll try hiker, I'll try sunrise, I'll try nature, and a couple of them weren't exactly coming up. It wasn't finding this exact one again. So I think I had to do that trick I told you about, where I found something that was similar, and I looked up other keywords, and then I think the ones that this one was listed under were like wild, solitude, alone, green, like some words you wouldn't exactly immediately think. So it's good to know like how the photographer that posted this image was thinking when they tagged it, because it's not always necessarily the actual content. My mind was drawn towards, there was a hiker in it, it was in a field, and it was either at sunrise or sunset. Those were kind of the three keywords I was going after. But from kind of the photographer's, designer's mind, he was thinking like the kind of composition. So he was like solitude, green, like some things that I wasn't immediately thinking of. So if you haven't found it by now, that's okay. Just find a similar image, and we're going to start playing around with it. Make sure you do the full click-through, you get the full-size image, and then I want you to right-click on it and say, save as. Just save it to the desktop somewhere. We're going to be using this in PowerPoint here in a second. And in fact, it's great that you brought that up. On this kind of intro photo info page, if you'll notice on the right side, it'll say usage rights or usages, and it'll say often royalty-free or Creative Commons or whatever it is, and it's actually got a link so that you can click on it and it explains what, if anything, you have to do to make sure it's properly cited, which is very convenient. Google and other searches like that really don't make it that simple, but this one it's very easy. And in fact, sometimes a photographer will simply ask that you ask permission first before using his image or his or her image. And if that's the case, a large pop-up will appear if you click on it through the searches, through your search result, that will prompt you to begin to say, hey, If you want to use this, that's fine, but for my specific conditions, I'd like you to please ask me first. It's still free, it just kind of gives you another extra step, and if you're doing the presentations the night before, you may want to look elsewhere for another image.
And then did you already download it? I right-clicked it, yeah. Okay, perfect.
Okay,
So it's on your desktop?
so now we've got a great image to work with. Let's see how to use them. So, the problem is, now that we have these beautiful, like, full screen images, if we start slapping text on them, you'll already notice that you start sacrificing a little bit of legibility. And this can be, you can get some extreme cases, like say when you have an image that's a very even mixture of lights and darks, you may think, well, if I have white text on it, then in the sky part, it is lost, but if I have dark text on it, then in the mountain or dark part, then that's lost. Like, how do I still make this look nice? And because what's important is the content that I need to convey. Hopefully you've taken time in selecting your images so that already kind of gives you a good jump start in explaining your content. And you're using text to support that, but the text is still important as well. So how do we make sure that it's not lost on these beautiful backgrounds? And the way you do that is the patent pending, trademark Landon Phillips rectangle trick. So we'll walk you through it right here. Basically, what the rectangle trick does is just make a small section of the screen that has a little bit of contrast so that your text can pop off of that and still be legible. So now, again, this is kind of a follow along with me if you like, or if you just want to take note. We will be making this PowerPoint available to download. So if you need a refresher, I tried to structure each of the slides to be very step-by-step in how to do it, but we can also do it together here. So first, I want you to draw a rectangle the entire width of the screen. So if you go up to the Insert menu.
Should we be in PowerPoint right now?
Yes, please. Yeah, in PowerPoint, go up to the Insert menu, and you should see something that says like Shapes. Should be a little tab that says Shapes. If you click on that, it should give you a couple options. Click on the one that has a picture of a rectangle on it. So then you just draw it all the way across the width, and if you don't get it perfectly, that's fine. Okay, great. So you just click the rectangle there. And then just go, I usually start top left and go bottom right, and just drag it across like that.
Do you have to drag it over and just go like that?
Yes, for our exercise though, we're making it a little narrower. Exactly. There's no set height, obviously. I like having it go just from edge to edge because it looks a little bit more incorporated into the image. Sometimes if you just have a floating box on top, it can kind of look a little out of place. So I just like having it go all the way across. And then the default will probably look like this. It's usually that kind of blue rectangle that is fine, but you know, if we want to gussy it up a little bit, that's very easy to do. We want to make the rectangle contrast against our background, so what I usually like to do is make it dark and have white text on top. The way you do that is you right-click on the rectangle and go to Format Shape. Should be the very last option. So you can control-click on it. Yeah. Go to Format Shape, very bottom. So it should give you some good options. Windows by default will automatically give you the fill color options right off the bat. So you can see the little paint bucket icon. If you haven't already, let's go ahead and use that image from before. So go up to, back to Insert again. Okay.
Insert picture.
Go back up to Insert, yeah, Insert Picture. Browse to wherever you saved it, probably either in My Documents or on the desktop. So now, in PowerPoint, the order of operations is important. You've noticed this is a good example of if you kind of get ahead of yourself and you do something out of order, how to fix it. Right now, your image will probably be on top of that rectangle that you just made.
Just like go right now.
Thankfully, it's very easy to change that order of operations.
Then you can grab all those corners.
Head here and catch this back
All
up.
you do is create a
What you can
small
do,
rectangle.
in fact, my example here on the screen is sometimes if I accidentally do the text first and then the rectangle on top, even though I picked white text, it'll look gray. The reason why is because that transparent black is on top of the white lettering. So I need to right-click on either my image here or my rectangle. Let's go ahead and right-click on the image itself. And there should be an arrange sort of function. All right, so we've got some good-looking white text on some black rectangles. Things are popping, things are legible. So that's option 1 for the rectangle trick. Option 2 is done almost the exact same way, but it's black text on white. So the other option is, instead of just drawing a small rectangle across, say, like an arbitrary height portion of the screen, you can take a white rectangle and start in the bottom corner and drag it all the way to the top so that it covers literally the entire image. If I do that, having now completely hidden my image, and then take that transparency down a small amount, you mute the image enough so that black text will still pop against it, but you kind of have the background image in the back of your viewer's mind. So this can kind of be a great way when you're structuring your presentations. So, like, if you now have these great visuals that you want to incorporate, and then you want to talk about your text content after that, sometimes you can start with just a full screen image with no text. This is your cue as a professor, as a presenter, to say, okay, boom, this is the Civil War musket that I'm talking about. And this model and make of this gun was effective for the North because of these reasons, blah, 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 blah. Now I'm actually kind of telling the story to my students. This is the part where they can actually be writing down what I'm saying rather than just trying to copy verbatim what's on the screen. After I give a little bit of spiel talking about it, I can then advance to the next slide, which is literally the same image, but now it's been muted with this white trick so that, the single line of, manufactured in, 1862 by such and such company comes up. So that you can kind of, this addresses some of the challenges we talked about earlier about, Professor, can I just have a copy of your slides? Because now, even if they had the deck, even if they downloaded it, they miss the part where I'm actually having a conversation with them beforehand. So the image can kind of be a starting point for that conversation, and that's the real interaction and note-taking portion that they'll participate. That's what gives them the benefit of coming to class and paying attention. Because if they just download it afterwards, they're not going to get the full explanation. They're just going to get like a simple snippet of when the gun was manufactured.
So you put a text box on top of this?
Exactly. Yeah. So you make literally a full screen rectangle that's slightly less transparent.
And white, this is white?
This is white. Yeah. So it
And
does this
where on the gradient,
on the transparency.
yeah,
I'd only take the transparency down a small amount because I
less than 10%?
10 to 20, yeah, probably. Because with the black rectangles,
Yeah.
you want it to be mostly transparent and less opaque because black is so strong. And this one we want it to be mostly opaque and less transparent because that's how we really mute all the colors in the image. So you can just, there's no set rule. I can't tell you always do 15%, always do 10%, because it's just going to vary based on your image. If you have a predominantly white sky in your image, you're not going to need a ton of transparency for your white text box. So this kind of segues us into our next portion, which is portion control. So we've already talked a lot about this with visuals, but we want to use more slides with less text on each slide to be effective. And I've already rehashed this point a lot, but yada, yada, yada. I give you a mountain of text. You're going to check out. It's not going to be memorable. The reason why is I can read out loud about 250 words a minute. That's around the average. A person can read in their head around 350 words a minute. Now, if I put a bunch of text on the screen, your audience who's good, hardworking Pepperdine students who are paying attention are going to start reading it. That's just how human nature is. We're going to see, we're going to examine what's put in front of us. So if they're reading faster than you can possibly talk, but then you start talking over that, then the two are just going to cancel each other out, and it ends up not being effective. So not only do you bore them to death, but you also are hurting yourself because you're sabotaging your own message. So simplicity is key. Now, I already kind of went over this, but we remember, Professor, can I get a copy of your slides? Managing the amount of content on each slide is the best way that you can still add value for your students' participation. That's the motivation for them coming to class, because if I don't give them a giant, book on each slide, they're going to need to come and pay attention and take notes on what I'm saying versus what I've written down in my deck. How much of that balance you find in terms of content per slide and conversation per classroom is up to each individual professor. There's no hard and fast rule for that. But finding that balance is important so that they can actually maximize their experience here. So the final point is cutting the fat. Bullet points are actually very bad for your health. People, this is the main dietary restriction we want to impose. We want to figure out how we can get rid of these, because the fatty comfort foods that is bullet points will put your audience to sleep faster than a Thanksgiving dinner. Regular bullet points can quickly get monotonous and are easy forgettable. So I want you to go as far as getting rid of them entirely. If you can kill all of your bullet points, more power to you. That's excellent. Now instead, what I'm not saying is that, just let the visuals speak for themselves. You don't need to put up any content on your screen. Believe me, I'm a designer. I know what I'm talking about. Obviously, you're going to need to have that text component on your screen as well. What I'm encouraging you to do is, instead of just putting up simple, dry bullet points, find a way to incorporate them into your visuals. So an extreme example of this would be a presentation I actually revamped, bless you, for a presentation a few years back on facts on the brain. And instead, this initially started off as literally just, 3 bullet points on the left, a tiny clip art image of the brain on the right, and they called it a day. How we improved that was we found this beautiful image on Stock Exchange and then incorporated the bullet points into the visuals so it looked like the neurons were actually firing with each bullet point. So this, 1, still gets that information across. 2, it does it in a very eye-catching and memorable way. 3, the image and the text complement each other so well that it further enhances. That's where you get that 65% retention that we talked about earlier. Really cements it into the brain. Now some of you may think, well, that's all well and good, but I don't have Photoshop and I don't have the time to be making this all look fancy and well blended and very, cool. That's okay. You can actually do a lot more than you think, even just with the modified version of that rectangle trick we talked about. This was just a simple Stock Exchange image that I found. You can still incorporate those text boxes in a unique way by using something called a smart object in PowerPoint. That just kind of lets you skew the text and make it look kind of like it's inlaid into the visual versus just flat on top. And then you can kind of still give the illusion that the neurons are firing using a similar rectangle trick. All I did here was just do a circle instead of a rectangle. I changed the transparency just like I did with the rectangle trick. And now you still kind of get the general point across that the neurons are kind of firing as you're talking about this. So even with very little time or very little background in design, you can still find unique ways to incorporate your bullet points into your visuals. Even if it's something as rudimentary as this, it'll be a lot more effective than just point A, point B, point C. Now, if that doesn't work, that's okay. Say you can't find the right visual, say your type of content doesn't particularly lend itself to this setup, that's fine. We can go back to the other dietary recommendation of less is more. If you can distill your content into a single word and just space all of your bullet points out, then that can be, in a lot of ways, much more effective than those giant walls of text. Again, this is kind of that balance points of talking points versus, already pre-written notes. Having a simple word or phrase being your main, slide that then facilitates the conversation between you and your classroom can be what kind of encourages that participation. So sometimes you may just start off with a single word. that leads you to start talking, and then that opens the floor to a question about, tell me about why, the spread of industrialization was a factor in such and such war. I also just love the visual of having one giant number that kind of teaches you like sequentially like how these things kind of make sense in an order of operations. And also the less is more approach is great. I mean, tons and tons of people far smarter than I have written all sorts of quippy sayings on brevity is the source of wit. Mark Twain, I think, said in one of his correspondences, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. Sometimes it can be much harder for us as a professor to kind of distill things down into something that's very easily manageable. So our kind of crutch that we lean on are the slides with tons of text on them. What this exercise can do, this is almost as much for you as it is for your students. It can get you to rethink your content and your delivery and say, okay, how can I say all that with less? How can I distill this down to the very core component of what I want students to leave this room knowing? Because if I can trim that down to just, 3 main sections or 4 main sections or however many it is versus pages and pages of copious notes, then they're going to get out of here, and the next day they're still going to remember it, and the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that. So finding that balance can sometimes improve the quality of your content just by kind of making you do it with self-imposed restriction. Another style that's the easiest to do, in case you don't have time to find all the perfect visuals and incorporate your bullet points into visuals. If you can't have time to distill them down into the single word or the 3-word approach to bullet points, if you just really need to stick to your bullet points and you need to have them, as you've been doing business as usual, that's okay. I don't recommend it, but that's okay. Try a different approach though. So this is a great way to illustrate big ideas versus individual points. A lot of times, students, if they are trying to type down, what they see on the screen, and you're advancing slides too fast, then they say, wait, go back. I didn't see what it was. Did you realize what you said right there? I missed it. And then they can get so sidetracked that they stop paying attention to you and they lose focus. You can try highlighting text one line at a time to maintain that focus, but then keeping that big picture. So what I did here, it's a little hard to see with this projector, but this isn't any animation or any fancy thing in Photoshop where the bullet points come on one at a time. This is literally 4 slides with identical text on every single slide, but I just went and made some of the lines gray and one of the lines white. So sequentially, they can still see what they've already talked about, what's coming up, and like why, what part you're currently talking about. So if they've zoned out when they're writing notes, and they're like, what section is what are we talking about now? Then the white section will still be up on the screen. Also, conversely, like if they missed something you just said earlier, they'll still know, again, that big overall picture in terms of overall order of operations, because it's still kind of on the page. But the reason why I like this as opposed to just your standard all white text bullet points coming up one at a time is by the time you get to the 3rd, 4th, 5th bullet point, you have that mountain of text. And it's harder to focus on that individual aspect, or it's easier to kind of say, oh, we're on line 4 or line 5, remember? This kind of breaks that up visually. So this is the simplest way to modify your currently existing bullet points into something that's a little bit more visually impactful. So another technique when you're talking about giving these presentations is...
Landon, really quick,
yes.
Going back to where you literally had 4 slides.
Yeah, this
But
is...
same information.
Exactly.
Across 4 slides, so
Mhm.
nice and easy. But it's breaking up the notion that it has to be all on one slide.
Exactly. Like if you actually saw here, this is literally just the same slide duplicated 4 times, just with a different line highlighted white each time. That's all it is.
Doesn't PowerPoint have the ability to do that where?
It does. There's an
Okay,
animation that you can
like
scroll through and see where you highlight text one line at a time.
Yeah.
But sometimes getting the timing right or the clicks right
Okay.
can be a little
This is-
confusing. So this is
more
just a
efficient.
very
Yes.
simple kind of workaround
Yeah,
version.
The other advantage of this model of doing each slide is if you ever do online presentations through like Blackboard Collaborate or something else, it won't do animations. You have to import
lose your
each,
animation.
you
Yeah.
lose animations if you import it into an online conferencing
That's right.
tool.
Yep.
But if they're each an
Yeah,
individual
then you can do
slide,
it.
then
Mhm.
you get your animation, but it's because it's per slide.
It's kind of a
Yeah.
workaround, yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing if you need to make it available as a PDF, say if you want to post it to courses, or if you're giving a lecture at a conference and you need to post your materials but you don't want to give them the original PowerPoint file. PDF, again, automatically rips out all the animation off the bat. So this is a great way to get around that as well. So the other element we want to talk about is building in breaks. I'm sure a lot of you have taught classes, or really anything over an hour. You're probably going to need some sort of break. It doesn't necessarily mean, okay, 5 minutes, go to the bathroom, go get a snack, do whatever. Sometimes that can just mean, you know, like I did halfway through the class, let's do an exercise where we're all actually actively participating. We'll set up a stock exchange account. We'll actually, you know, work along with me and try working on this rectangle trick right now. Something that keeps your audience participating. The reason this is included in this kind of design aspect of your PowerPoint is that you can use slides both for yourself and for your students to remind you of those visual breakouts. So sometimes, you know, every, say, on this PowerPoint presentation, right, remember how I said I want you to do more slides with less text? A lot of people can think at the end, like, oh man, if I have like 40 slides, that's going to be too much information, it's going to run long. If you style it this way, it really doesn't, because essentially you're only spending a few moments on each slide for them to like visually process it. It's one little piece of information that they take and then they move on. That's a lot easier to digest than these massive onslaughts of text and then only doing that 4 or 5 times in a 2-hour class. So this deck that I've done for this presentation is 70 or 80 slides long, but it doesn't feel quite like that because the information is so short. So what I like doing is incorporating slides like this that kind of give me that reminder. Okay, it's been 30 slides since I've had a break. That's probably 20 to 30 minutes or however long it is. That kind of reminds me, all right, I need to do something where I'm making sure they're awake, they're participating. Maybe it's a quick quiz. Maybe it's group work where they talk to a partner about something that we just discussed and then they come back to the class later. Anything like that. So I wanted to give an example of putting this into practice and using some great examples of transformation. This was an actual slide provided by a student who's kind enough to give me permission to use it today. This was from a previous faculty professional development thing where we took our old slides and revamped them. So can anybody tell me how we could probably improve this slide? Just based on kind of the dietary things we talked about, the workout plan we talked about earlier. How could this good content be better? First of all, what do you notice about it? What jumps off the page?
So many words.
A lot of words, a lot of text.
It's the way you don't like it, with the white on blue.
It's this kind of standard boilerplate stuff.
Yeah.
That again, it's okay on its own, but it can be improved. A lot of text, no visuals. There's no images on anything. So after going through the class and studiously applying the information, this is his after selection. So he took that one slide and broke it into 3 parts. We found a great image that's full screen. This was a good example of don't become too fixated on an image in your mind and spend forever trying to find it. We actually worked together to try to look for an image, and when we were talking about vocalics, we're thinking about dialects and everything that's not the actual words that you're hearing and conveying in speech. So he was thinking of like a very specific image that we just couldn't find because it was so specific. There's not a stock image for it. We settled on this one though because what it comes down to is what your ear processes. That's still, again, it's kind of that lateral thinking as a professor. Okay, how else can I convey this information? Oh, well, I wouldn't initially think about it, but having a picture of an ear actually works really well. So we put that on there, very simple definition. Second slide, we use that rectangle trick, and we just had a very simple example of what vocalics is. The third slide that they broke up was actually a video that they even incorporated from YouTube. So now we've got multimedia aspects in there too, which is also good for keeping, you know, things interesting and varied throughout the class. So that one slide, most of the content stayed similar, if not verbatim, but broken up into different parts makes it so much easier to digest. And when I can associate each one with a strong visual in my mind, again, 65% retention, that's what we're talking about. So quick review. I'm going to show you the peacock. What does the peacock mean? That was the first slide we talked about. We want to use images. Yes, feast for the eyes, use visuals. What was the pepper about? Portion control. Yes, less is more. Very good, very good. This is a little pop quiz here at the end. I'm glad we're paying attention. And then the fat, overweight Lego person.
Lose the bullets.
Exactly. Cut the fat, lose your bullet points. That's very good. So if you would like to download the presentation, we will make it available on our website, which I've included here. I've also included, this is built to be kind of a starter kit for your design, for your PowerPoints. In case you forget exactly how to do the rectangle trip, that's why I outlined everything step by step. I even have a section here in the back for sample backgrounds if you want to use for your PowerPoint slides, and it also has some references on like how to walk you through stock exchange again. So all that is wrapped up in a nice, neat little PowerPoint for you to download and just kind of have in your documents or on your desktop to kind of give you a refresher anytime you want to apply any of this information. But thank you for coming out today.